Okay. Maggie, thank you for that fantastic introduction. I just hope I'm not going to disappoint you with my presentation today. It kind of rambles a little, so I'll try and keep as much on topic as I can. So I'm going to be talking about growing virtual communities. And although I'm primarily going to concentrate on Second Life, there will be some side glances at other communities too. And going back into history too, they're looking at online communities. It's a topic I've been exploring one way or another since 1995. And I'll be talking a little about my real life, so you'll get an idea of how I've been doing that. So let's start. I'm the editor of Prim Perfect magazine. You can see some covers here and the blog page. It's a magazine for design, about design, homes and gardens in Second Life. I'm just wondering about putting Fulbright on this. Just give me a second. I think it might look better with Fulbright. Yeah, that's better. Prim Perfect was the first homes and gardens magazine in Second Life. There's more since then, and that's great to see. I'm also the executive producer of Designing Worlds, the TV show, and Designing Worlds looks at design and designers in virtual worlds. We also cover issues that come up from time to time that are of interest and importance to people within Second Life. We've done topics like griefing, for example, and when there were problems with browsers, we talked about that a few years ago. We've done programs in collaboration looking at some of the things that the lab do. As well, like when they introduced pathfinding and experience tools, we did, and materials. We did shows on all of that. We also look at really beautiful designs, so we cover quite a lot of stuff in the show. I've also worked on other media too. I'm the exec producer of Happy Hunting, which is for the Hunt TV program for the Hunt community. Metaverse Arts used to be an arts program that's no longer running, unfortunately. The Primgraph magazine, which was a magazine for the steampunk communities. That was great fun, but took an awful lot of time and work, and that kind of came to a sad end. Then we did something called the Quest for the Golden Prim, and I really feel that the potential for Second Life as a format where we can have graphic novels is really sort of underutilized. You can create comic book effects really easily and get some stunning effects in Second Life. I'm surprised that more hasn't been done with it, and it's something I'd be happy to do again. It was a very interesting experiment. We ran for about 11 episodes. We got through the first chapter of the story, and that was good. And then there was the Black and Mirror, which was the Black Mirror was a drama which we presented on Treat TV, and I'm very proud of that. It was my first foray into filming drama in Second Life, and it had huge problems there because of the limitations of what you can do in Second Life. So some of the biggest stunts we did really easily, but it took us ages to work out how to get a group of people to walk down a street together, stop halfway, and turn and have an argument. I think we spent about 8 hours filming people walking down the street till we got it right. So, interesting experience that. And I loved the result, the Black and Mirror. I'd be interested to see what Blue Baker's doing. Beth mentioned that Blue Barker Low Tide has done a bit with graphic novels. I'll look that out. If you've got a link, that would be great. We could even put it into this presentation. Latest media project I'm working on is Lab Chat. It's a co-production by a lot of Second Life broadcasters and Linden Lab. And it's going out every couple of months or so. It's really chats with Ebe, where we put questions that residents in Second Life have put. Ebe Linden is the CEO of Linden Lab. And so basically we have like an open forum with him. We'll put questions that we've been sent, and usually he gives people who come and to see and who are in the audience a chance to ask some questions too. It's great to do because he's actually someone very open and interested in talking. So the shows are pretty interesting. So that's about Saffia, the avatar, who's sitting in front of you today. And now I'm going to talk a little about Pauline, the typist, who's sitting behind the microphone and the keyboard. For 20 years, I was a teacher. And instantly you can guess that I am not a spring chicken in the first heedless flash of youth. I taught English, language and literature. I taught theatre studies, film studies, media studies, and communication studies. And I think some of the last will certainly spill out in some of the things I'm going to be talking about today. I then took a second degree in electronic media. It was back in the dawn, the real dawn of the internet. We were learning how to design websites in 1995, when everyone still thought that Blink was a really cool idea and that it was utterly hilarious to put up a group of a road, men at work road sign to show that your website was still under construction. I imagine that some of you here may remember that.
Oh, yes.
Anyway, after that, I moved on to work as a rural regeneration consultant. We were trying to build online communities in rural areas. It was when the internet was really taking off. So we were doing things like running training courses in Word, Excel, Office, products of various kinds. We were also teaching people how to use the internet. And the idea was that they could then use it for business purposes, especially as various EU regulations were coming in at that time that wanted people not to do their books online, as would happen now, but just use computers to do their books. So we were teaching we were training people in various internet techniques. And I had a real sense of how the internet could be powerful drawing a community together when in the early 2000s there was an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in the UK. a lot of people were isolated in their villages because of the restrictions and the quarantine that was imposed on farms. A lot of people couldn't go out. I was producing then a daily update news bulletin, which was giving the latest information in a fairly simple, straightforward form so they could find out what was going on. And there was a real sense in doing that, that I was talking to a fairly disparate community that had come together. Part of my job was to try and grow communities in rural areas, and sad to say, having a disaster was really quite important in that development. I moved on from there to my current part-time job, which I balance with Second Life. I'm a learning technologist at the University of Oxford. I work in the Medical Sciences Division, and essentially my job there is taking questions from academics, written questions from academics, and converting them into a suitable software form where the students can take the exams online. It's a bit like doing a kind of crossword puzzle all day long, which, you know, can be quite fun. I've also done other stuff for learning technology too, so that remains. I've got a bit of background in education, a bit of background in non-profits, and a bit of background in learning technology. So yeah, it's quite a useful bunch of stuff to have. So my first connection with virtual worlds goes back quite a long way. When I was doing my master's in electronic media, I encountered the writings of Harold Reingold, who I'm sure that some of you have come across, and was completely inspired by what he was writing about online communities. And I went and found places like the Palace, which was a very, very early online virtual world. And I was fascinated by the possibilities and what could be achieved with an online virtual world. That in turn, I didn't actually come to Second Life till I was doing my current job. And my line manager suggested that I might like to check out Second Life for them, because they were thinking how it could be used as an educational tool. I don't think they were expecting me to be quite so enthusiastic and kind of disappear into Second Life, leaving a little trail of smoke behind as I rush deeper and deeper inside it. But yeah, that was how I came to Second Life. Saffia is actually an alt. I came in as Pauline Woolley, who's still around, and actually I do some of my other work in Second Life with Polly. My but Saffia, I basically logged in as created my avatar as Polly, and within a day I'd realised this was going to be the most enormous fun, so I thought I'd create another avatar who would not be connected with my work at all, and I created Saffia, and Saffia kind of took over. So here in Second Life, one of the things I have explored have been how virtual environments develop and are strengthened and come together. And the two core elements are nesting and communities. These are what I've seen driving successful online communities. The nesting is when you actually have a sense of place, a place where you can be. And the communities are when communities join together and are self-sustaining. So what I want to do is look at these two core elements in a little more detail. We can talk about, I mean, within Second Life, other things seem important as well. Things like the ability to create content and share content. And I would see that as important. That's something that reaches back even in many virtual worlds, but there have been successful virtual worlds that functioned as social platforms on terms floating on a sea of pre-generated content. So I think content creation is important, but I think that the ability to have a piece of it for yourself and find a community that you can be with is probably equally important. Well, I would say more important. Okay, so let's look first at the idea of nesting. So first, when we come into Second Life, we create ourselves and develop ourselves. Now, the images here are taken from a wonderful little promotional video called A Year in Second Life that was made by Pookie Media, Pookie Amsterdam's company. And I give the YouTube address there because if you haven't seen this one already, you really, really should see it. It's absolutely, it encapsulates so much of what Second Life is about in, I think, a couple of minutes. But we start by creating ourselves, customizing ourselves to get the look we want. And then we find a home. So we can buy or rent it, and we can have a home which can be small and friendly, can be large and imposing. It can be absolutely magnificent. This is Angel Manor, and yeah, people live here. There's a whole residential community living in apartments that would not look out of place as the apartments of Buckingham Palace. But other people want small homes. So why do people want homes? Why do people want to nest? And I've thought about this. I can suggest two reasons, and I'm sure there are many more, maybe reasons that you're familiar with. But the two reasons I find particularly strong are the sense of snapping into presence. By that I mean that when you enter a virtual world, you are very quickly possessed of a sense that you are there in the virtual world. You relate to your avatar by identifying with your avatar. A friend of mine said that when she first came into Second Life, within about 20 minutes, she was thinking, oh, I want to go over there. And she said it was striking that she wasn't thinking, I want to manipulate my avatar. I want to move my avatar over there. It was, no, I want to go over there. So her sense of herself was tied up intrinsically with the avatar that she was becoming. And I've seen it again with my 7-year-old granddaughter, who is allowed to watch the screen with my hand on the mouse in some carefully planned events that we do together. And when I'm with her, the avatar I use is a little fairy, and she will talk of being herself, but also being the fairy, that we are the fairy. And it's fascinating to watch. There's also a sense of public and private space. I think this is very interesting, that when you are in a virtual world, there is very much a sense that you are in a space which might be public, like this one here today, but it could also be private. It's like your home. I'm sure that many of the people here who have residences in Second Life, even if they don't have ban lines around their home, really feel that their homes are a place for them. And they may get visitors from time to time, sometimes unexpected, but it is still your home. It is still your space, and you feel that other people coming in is an intrusion. Now, this is true. This sense of public and private space is true of many types of virtual worlds, even text-based virtual worlds. And it's a long time ago, but there's something quite interesting that I would like to read you that comes from my dissertation. Because it's a very interesting story. Individuated focuses, of course, rapidly become perceived as personal space. The question of personal space in the internet is a fascinating one, with many commentators exploring the idea of occupying space in cyberspace. The idea of writing space, expressed by Bolter in Writing Space, the Computer, Hypertext and the History of Writing, has been explored and developed in a variety of ways. As in Randall Woodland's discussion of how specifically gay spaces have been constructed on the web. In his essay, Queer Spaces, Modern Boys and Pagan Statues, Gay, Lesbian Identity and the Construction of Cyberspace, Woodland has an instructive anecdote about how people perceive cyberspace as an actual entity. One evening, I was logged on to SLMOOC16, the original system of this kind. I was in one of the public spaces, the lawn in front of the large abandoned mansion that is the central architectural feature of SLMOOC, where many people came and went on their way to other places in the MOO. Now, this, of course, is a text-based world. I'm stopping here to say this is a text-based world. Everything is achieved by writing. The buildings are described by typing in a description of them. The way you look is achieved by typing in a self-description that you paste when someone says hello to you. So back to Randall's experience. One passerby asked about the pink triangle that I was wearing as part of my self-description. I explained that the symbol originated as a Nazi concentration camp badge and that it signified gay rights. Though my new acquaintance immediately made it clear that he was straight and had a steady girlfriend, he seemed intrigued by what I had said. Once I confirmed that I was gay, he had a number of questions he wanted to ask about homosexuality, some fairly explicit. Drawing on my experience of talking to psychology classes and community groups over the years, I answered as best I could. As his questions and my answers got more and more graphic, my clear sense of him at that time was that his curiosity had no ulterior motive, nor did my responses. In other words, this was a conversation about sex rather than a sexually charged conversation. Since our conversation took place in an area with a fair amount of traffic, unsuspecting passers-by might inadvertently eavesdrop on our conversation. Mindful of a central principle of netiquette, that one should not subject other users to unwelcome explicit language, I began feeling that we should move. I explained this to my new acquaintance and asked, with as little sense of cliché as I could muster, if he wanted to come back to my room. He said no. Now, this move that I suggested would simply have meant that we were reading information, the room description, from a different section of the Lambda database in Palo Alto, and that the text we were producing was no longer accessible to other users. But the real-life implications of that invitation, translated by my interlocutor into real-life terms, were too much for him to deal with. He did agree, much as he would have in real life, I think, to move to a more secluded part of this public park so that we wouldn't disturb other users. We had reached a curious compromise. Our discourse seemed to me inappropriate for the public space on the front lawn. The spatial implications of going back to my room suggested to him a discourse he found threatening. Yet both of us understood that spatial descriptions and appropriate discourse were linked in this particular virtual world. Teachers operating within physical space will find, and perhaps should encourage, students to seek out secure spaces in cyberspace from which to operate, even within the classroom. This is me writing 20 years ago, actually. But yeah, as Woodland says, spatial metaphors are an important clue about the different safe cyberspaces that have been established. It is important that this should not be neglected, as not only the sense of isolation in its most positive form, but also the notion of reward will operate most forcefully when the student feels a sense of security from which to operate. So I would say that this security is important to the concept of nesting, vital to the concept of nesting. Our home, even if it's a skybox, even if it's a very small space, gives us a sense of security. It may indeed be a very fragile security, but nonetheless, it gives us a safe place from which we can operate within a virtual world. And that is why nesting is so important. At least in my eyes. So I'd like to just give you a little more of what I said on the subject then, and I think you may agree it's applicable now. This security does not only come from knowledge and skill in using the technologies, but from the creation of a definite safe space. It's no coincidence that net technology makes use of such as play with the word home, being the name not only for the site designed by the user, as in a home page, but also the chosen first page in a browser, so that a user who is lost or confused may return there for security. Another aspect of cyberspace in building this sense of place and this sense of security can be seen in the popularity of the map metaphor. From the very beginning, there have been attempts to map cyberspace. I remember back in the mid-90s, there was a site called East Adderley, which actually was portrayed as a little English village with a graphical interface, which just basically showed little pictures of houses arranged around a street as a map, and people could rent these houses, which would then be links to their own websites, their own businesses on the web. I remember that Babel Fish back in those days actually had a place in East Adderley. but it's sadly long since gone, and I can't find any references to it. I wish I had some pictures of it from those days. And then there was GeoCities. Um, GeoCities, of course, was one of the first websites that started the democratization of websites because anyone could build one and host it there. So they had a definite place. Later, it became, I would say, a vast urban sprawl. But when it set up, the idea of GeoCities was you would actually group yourself into communities of interest. So there was an area, I think, called Hollywood in GeoCities, where it was meant to be for people who were interested in movies and movie making, and different kinds of fans could all gather together and find out about movies. Later, as I say, they kind of abandoned this, and you just got an anonymous numbered plot somewhere in GeoCities. The sense of place was pretty much lost. I'm not sure if that was a feature of the decline of GeoCities, but I think that the early attempt to give it a realistic foundation was a very interesting one. There have also been graphical representations of the whole of the internet, attempts to map the internet. You can see a couple here. One is by the people who do XCD cartoons, and another is just a very beautiful map of the different aspects of the internet. So the map metaphor has worked very powerfully. And of course, Second Life and other virtual worlds will be going with the idea of Second Life and other virtual worlds have used the idea of a map, even though it's quite rare for people perhaps to travel directly more than a couple of sims, because people will tend to teleport from place to place. Nevertheless, people find the map reassuring, I think, and comforting, because it is a familiar space. And when you think of Second Life, you do tend to think in terms of places on the map, I think. Not primarily places on the map, but over you still are have a sense of a physical location. And I can give you an example from me today. I was looking up where to come for this talk, and I saw, when I clicked on the link and looked at it, I saw, oh, it's in Hetrosara. Oh, I wonder if it's near the railway, because I associate Hetrosara with the lovely Second Life railway system and the trains that go around. We did a show on that, so there I was looking for that. So that map sense of place is important. There are, of course, other things that work without maps. WordPress, for example, doesn't attempt to map its blogs, and Sansar is not going to try and map the experiences it will be creating. I find that very interesting. I can see what they're doing and why they're doing it, but I know for a lot of Second Life users it makes Sansar seem very strange. I think it could be as important for... No, but you can call up maps, can't you, Gentle, in OpenSim? You can look at a map of where you are. In Sansar, you won't be able to do that. They're going for something more like, I guess, WordPress and what I think is interesting, though, they're going for a kind of democratization in creating virtual reality that we saw with GeoCities democratizing creating websites. And I think that's something very exciting. I'm watching how it develops with keen interest. Okay, so communities. What do we mean by communities in virtual worlds? So they can be as varied as communities in the first world, in the real world. Possibly even more so. There can be communities of locality. Japanese speakers bond together, as will Portuguese speakers. Latin American Portuguese speakers have a huge community. So do Japanese. The Japanese, but when they are non-English speakers, we may not encounter them very often unless we deliberately go and visit. There's also communities of locality where people in Second Life, where people come together to create a locality that they then see as their place and recognize people from it, even if they meet them in other circumstances. And hello, Beth, Caledonians, both of us. So there are places where people live and then will move out from. So there's a kind of created locality. There can be created localities that people form in Second Life, which they can move beyond and around and away from and back to, just as they would in real life. There are also communities of interest, which can be drawn together by a common interest that relates to the real world, such as the non-profits, where people will come together for certain causes like Relay for Life, or they may come together to share experiences in non-profits, as happens with non-profit commons. There's various literary groups are another example of a community of interest where you have people coming together to read and discuss books together. You can have them coming together to write and share their writing and create stories. These are communities that could potentially happen in the real world. By happening in Second Life, they actually can draw on a wider audience. You can be getting together and reading and discussing a poem synchronously with people in America, Australia, while you are based in Britain. You could have that online discussion on emails, say, but then it would become asynchronous. Possibly you could do it on Skype, but you don't. Then it's difficult to have the sense that you are, guess what, in the same space, the same safe space within cyberspace. Sorry, getting croaky. There are also internal communities of interest who can be linked by, for example, an interest in sport. This may be available in the real world, but it can also be played in Second Life. On the last slide, we saw a picture of playing Second Life golf, and you could see there was a little group of us playing golf and thoroughly enjoying it. There's also communities, for example, who go sailing. I picked out the idea of the communities for golf and sailing because both involve a certain amount of skill that's based on what happens in the real world, but can also but is applied obviously in a different way in Second Life. You need in in golf, you need to be able to do things like pick the right club for the hole, decide how hard you're going to hit the ball because you're given a range of choices, make allowances for the second life wind that's blowing. The second life wind obviously also plays a major part in second life sailing, when you decide how you're going to tack into the wind, coming out of the wind, or whatever you do, where you're going to turn your tiller, all these things that are based on real life skills that can be applied in second life. I find that very interesting. Obviously, by creating sports like second life sailing and second life golf, you're actually giving people a taste of the real life activity, and you're adding an element of skill and an element of chance. If you're a good golf player, you will make the right allowances for types of club, and also for the wind that's blowing. But if the wind is blowing back very hard against you, you're going to make a rotten shot no matter how good you are at choosing your clubs. So there is skills like that, and the best crafts when you're sailing depend on skill, whether you're sailing a real ocean-going, a sleek ocean-going yacht, or whether you're joining in pirate battles. You don't get too many pirate battles in the real world, though, so that becomes something that you're more likely to do in second life. And in addition, people might come together, these communities of interest might form around things that are only available in a virtual world. Living together, for example, as tinies, as happens in Raglanshire, or dragons. There are communities where people live as dragons, or being a giant snail and going racing. And I'm really sorry, I meant to pick up a picture of the giant snail races, and I haven't. My bad, because it would be fun to show a picture of the giant snail races. So some of these communities that you see, that are communities of interest that are drawn together, you have, for example, role play communities, some of which can be totally stunning and offering different forms. But role play doesn't need to be as complicated as fantasy. You can have fantastic communities. Here I've got an example of a dark horror community, sort of for vampire play. You've got a beautiful elven community. You've got the Wastelands, which is a dystopian set of regions that hosts dystopian roleplay. And you've got Luxembourg 1861, which is a great example of historical roleplay. Yes, 1920s Berlin is another one that's based around roleplay, and something you couldn't do in real life. You couldn't go and live in 1920s Berlin. You'd get some very strange looks if you attempted it in modern Berlin. Obviously, there are the Victorian communities and the steampunk communities as well. Again, some of them offering things that can't actually happen in real life. Even if we were able to kind of go and live in a historically realistic environment. Okay, but we're picking out on ones that have a kind of physical difference to them, with tinies, with with dragons, with fantasy role play, historical role play. But role play can be as simple and straightforward as the family role play, which is a very powerful community in Second Life, and child role play, which I feel sometimes gets an unfairly bad press. If you think about it like this, if you have a bunch of boys going off and making a camp in the woods and living in the woods and having adventures, it's very different from a group of men going off into the woods and building camps and having adventures. There is a sort of, I'm not sure that innocence is the right word, but there is a definite alteration in experience and a definite different sense of fun in doing certain activities as a child than there is in doing them as an adult. And the role play communities, yes, exactly, can still all be played, but adults, Gentle says, but adults are not allowed to play in the same way as children. That's right. And I've actually gone into, we did a program on one of the family role play areas, and I actually went in to a classroom, which was quite a weird experience for me as an ex-teacher. I have taught small children, and going in with Second Life small children was definitely strange. I don't, because there are so many of them, but the best thing to do is probably to look at the destination guide, Claire. They have quite a lot of the best roleplay sims listed on the destination guide. And going into the classroom, I suddenly saw how really much fun it would be to actually attend primary school and get to do all the messy, fun things you did at primary school all over again. And I could see why it was actually an attractive thing to do and a fun thing to do. And the time we went to Camp Hard Knock, was really fun. I'd never been to camp at an American camp because I'm a Brit and we didn't have things like that when I was a kid. And I have to say I was really tempted to go and try the camp experience. But anyway, so there are all kinds of forms of role play, and they can offering very different experiences to people. But there are other things that draw people together, and I would say because of the social activities like music and fashion, these can also draw people together to build up strong communities. A few years ago, a lot of the fashion people actually came together and lived in physical proximity in Costa Rica, which was at that time a very popular group of sims. And we get this sort of sense, of communities emerging from shared interests like music and and fashion. Now, I would say that people very seldom belong to just one community. They can create sub-communities within their own community, and New Babbage is a fascinating example of that. We've looked on Designing Worlds again at how they've created a literature of New Babbage that has actually been developed into books and published because they wanted to create a more definite sense of place around New Babbage. And so you can actually have subgroups. Not everyone in New Babbage writes, although I have to say sometimes it feels that way. But you've got people developing different areas of interest, forming sub-communities within virtual communities. And so here are some examples of communities. Some of them, these are on the mainland. Some of these are actually private estates that have grown up for communities. We've got Raglanshire having its Art Week. That's the community for tinies. At the top right, we have the East River community, which is one of the oldest communities in Second Life. I think it's about 14 or 15 regions that have come together on the mainland, and that they have actually managed to preserve their identity, which is a difficult thing to do, but they've managed to preserve their identity as a mainland community. So too has Nova Albion, which is the one in the centre, which has got these very cute brownstones with sort of stores and cafes in them. And I really like that. It's not quite so tight as a community, but it's got some lovely areas within it where the community sense is very strong. Then at the bottom right, we have Bay City, which is a good example of zoned building. The people in Bay City have, even though it's mainland, have a zoned theme and build together and have events going on together. And bottom left, of course, we have New Babbage, which is a very strong steampunk community. Again, it's a number of Sims coming together and working together. So these are some of the places that have created successful communities. So how can we help communities grow? Now, there is a real problem in Second Life, and this is difficulties with fragmented media. This is one of the problems. There is media within and around and about Second Life, dedicated to Second Life. There are blogs, there are magazines, there's in-world TV, but none of these have the kind of presentation that real-world media have. A lot of people will read some of the blogs. Some of them are very popular indeed. And Arpil, for example, is a very popular blogger. So too is New World Notes, although I think that's declining in popularity. Magazines tend to be read. My subscriptions for Perfect Designing Worlds have hovered at around the 25,000 mark. For years, though, more people come and other people leave, they unsubscribe. So there's quite a lot of churn, but that's still a very small proportion of the whole population of Second Life. So how do you get the word out to people? At the moment, people are working with a kind of scattergun effect of in-world groups, magazines, blogs, getting bloggers working together, maybe pulling in the virtual media, TV media, using Facebook, using Twitter, using all the forms of social media to publicize things. It's a lot of work, it's a lot to do. And to help communities grow, that's really tricky. To make people aware that a community exists and to try and bring people into it. Word of mouth and events, yes, that's effective. I don't know. I mean, in America, you probably have more fragmentation than we do in Britain. In Britain, the media is still quite tight. There's half a dozen daily newspapers that cover the whole of the country. So how do people get information out in the States? And how do people find out about it? I agree. When I put out a Designing Well show, I put it on my blog, I put it on Twitter, I put it on Facebook. Not just one Twitter account, it goes to about half a dozen different accounts. And several Facebook pages, which have, a number of followers, and the blog, and in world groups. And I get one or two new people at a show. Out of all of that, that must be going to be seen by about 50,000 people, and I'm getting a return of one or two. I think it also depends. I think it also depends what you are actually advertising and doing. If it's read this article, and you're putting that out and you get it retweeted by people who've got quite a large following, you're probably going to get quite a few hits. But if you're asking them to come to a Second Life event, that's going to be much, much fewer. Look at this, do this. Yeah, so I think, putting things out on social media will get you hits. So the most effective ways of publicity for the recent Virtual World's Best Practice in Education were the subscription listserv and the SL group notices. Yes. And certainly alerting people to the fact the show is out there does get hits. I think in a way, I found social media to be most effective when we've kind of been able to make it into an event. Fantasy Fair is coming up. Last year we had about 300 people who liked the Fantasy Fair page. So before the fair started, we had a campaign to get that over 500, and we did it. And it generated quite a bit of excitement. Fantasy Fair starts on April the 21st, and it's going to be amazing. We're having a Shakespeare Day this year to celebrate Shakespeare and fantasy, and all last night I was recording a special performance of Midsummer Night's Dream, which will be given at Fantasy Fair. Okay, so there is the difficulties with the fragmented media and social media too. One attempt to help communities grow has come from the Firestorm Community Gateway initiative. Originally, there were some fantastic community gateways and some very rubbish ones too, under the old Linton Lab Community Gateway program. Among the fantastic ones, I would include Virtual Ability, Caledon Oxbridge, Ireland, London, Dublin, Ireland, and I think there were also some great ones in some of the European countries. There was a very good German one, for example. The Linden Lab felt that they were not getting the user retention they had dreamed of, and so shut the program down with very little notice, much to the consternation of the sim owners who had invested an awful lot of money in the program. It kind of created problems that reverberated pretty much until Obey came, and was part of the, I would say, the catastrophic lack of trust that was between the residents and the lab, which I think has now been alleviated quite a bit, thank heavens. But they're coming back, community gateways, in a form, and the first of them to launch has been the Firestorm Community Gateway. If you haven't been over there, do go. It's a marvellous place. There's lots of different things you can try, like sailing, like deep sea diving, like playing golf. They've got a nice little golf course there. Piloting various vehicles of various kind, including aircraft, just to find out what you might like to do in Second Life. I am working with them at the moment on the idea of actually having an area of homes where they can get the idea of nesting, because I think that is going to be important to show people that they can have these safe spaces in cyberspace. Even though, yes, in a way it's completely illusionary that it is safe, but it feels safe. A good way of finding out about communities is things like the Second Life birthdays. At the moment, sadly, there is nothing like the Second Life birthdays. There's just the Second Life birthdays. But every year I go, I find something new that actually I'm like, wow, I didn't know you could do that in Second Life. It's how I found Second Life Golf, and also that you can do dressage in Second Life. So it was quite exciting to see all of that stuff. Another way of helping communities grow can be initiatives like the Linden Homes, where you can have your nest provided by the Lindens to start you off. However, I feel that the Linden Homes are something of a wasted opportunity for communities. They are designed to help with nesting. They give you that space, but they don't help build communities. They don't help create communities. You look at them and they are just little boxes on the hillside. And that's such a shame. I've talked to people about ways that we could change this, that we could improve it, still keeping the same number of houses per sim, but looking at it in a slightly different way. And we actually made up some architects' models of how it could be done. And I'm just waiting for this one to res, so I don't know if anyone is resed for anyone else. There, it's gone for me. So here are the 4 artist models set out. And the one closest to us was brownstones. Behind that there is a sort of marina for tropics, in the tropics. Behind that you can see the mountain, and then there's a giant tree which actually would have elven homes. Actually, let me see. Just give me a moment and I'll try and show you something. There we go. This is the architect's model of the tree, which is the only one I've got. And the idea was that you would actually have a tree Oh, that's interesting. I'd like to read that, Gentle. And this was an idea for an elven community, that everyone could have houses on that tree. There we go. It's starting to rest for me. Yes. Yes, you could do something like that. Yes, it's deliberately all grey because it's an architect's model. It's not meant to be the finished object. Which slide can you see, Gentle? Can you see the one with the buildings and the mountain? Sorry, Gentle, I should have said. No, the tree is not a slide. It's the only one I have in my inventory, sadly. And so all four of them that we had are set out there. And here on the right, we have the idea of an alpine community. So you would have winter sports. You'd have a ski lift that would take you up to a ski jump, or you could go higher to the ski runs down the mountain. You have little houses. People would have little houses around a central frozen lake where they could skate. And there's a guest house, because in all of our communities it's very important to actually have a central meeting place where people can get together, where they can organise events of one kind or another. And looking in a little more detail at some of the other places, on the left you can see the tropical community, which had little houseboats arranged around a marina. There was a lighthouse, there's palm trees. This would feature a tiki bar where people could gather again. You would also be able to sail out to other communities from here. And there's actually an area where the waves come in, where you could have surfing, which is another popular Second Life activity. And we also, on the other side, we have the brownstones, and this would feature a cafe in the building at the back beyond the trees that you see in the lower drawing. You can see it more closely in the top drawing, and you'd actually be able to go, and inside the cafe you'd meet and sit there and chat. And here you can see in the lower drawing there are little art easels arranged, because you could have community art events. There'd also be a lake here where you could have seven seas fishing. The whole idea is to bring people together, give them things to do so that they could join together and become friends. And create a community that would become social. Places plus events equals community, yes. I would say homes, safe spaces that are kind of inward, and the events are there too, so you can develop the social community, are going to be important. Okay, so extra information, just to let you know, many of the images in this presentation were captured for Designing Worlds by Wildstar Beaumont. And if you want to find out more about what I'm up to, what I do, visit Primperfect, www.primperfect.net. And that's it. I hope that that was of some interest to people. And I definitely now need to make a plug for Fantasy Fair, which is just going to be brilliant, and I want you all to come.